The November wind howled across the Montana plains like a banshee, carrying with it the first serious snow of the winter season. Cowboy Marcus Mac Donovan pulled his coat tighter as he rode his horse through the gathering dusk, eager to reach the warmth of his small ranch before the storm hit in earnest. What he found huddled behind a fallen log near Willow Creek would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, curled up in a ball with only a thin blanket wrapped around his small frame. His lips were blue with cold, his dark hair dusted with snow, and his clothes were little more than rags that offered no protection against the brutal Montana weather. "Hey there, little fellow," Mac called out gently as he dismounted, not wanting to startle the child. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The boy looked up with eyes that seemed far too old for his young face, filled with the kind of weariness that came from experiencing too much hardship. "Please don't hurt me, mister," he whispered through chattering teeth. "I was just trying to get warm." Mac knelt down beside the shivering child, his heart breaking at the sight of someone so young facing the harsh elements alone. "Son, I'm not going to hurt you. My name's Mac Donovan." "What's yours?" "Jimmy," the boy replied quietly. Jimmy Crowfeather. The name told Mac immediately that this was a Native American child, though his features suggested he might be of mixed heritage. In 1885 Montana, that could mean any number of difficult circumstances had led to him being alone in the wilderness. "Jimmy, how long have you been out here?" Mac asked, noting the way the boy's small body trembled with cold and exhaustion. 3 days, I think," Jimmy replied, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Maybe 4. Hard to tell." Mac felt his stomach clench with concern. 3 days in this weather without proper shelter or food could easily kill a grown man, let alone a child. "Where are your family, Jimmy, your parents?" The boy's eyes filled with tears that he quickly tried to hide. "Dead, sir. Soldiers came to our village 2 weeks ago. There was fighting, and—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Mac understood immediately. There had been increasing tensions between the military and various tribal bands throughout the territory, often resulting in tragic consequences for innocent families caught in the middle. "Jimmy, you must be hungry," Mac said gently. "When did you last eat?" The boy had to think about it. "Yesterday morning, I think. Found some berries, but they were mostly frozen." Without hesitation, Mac pulled dried meat and hardtack from his saddlebags, watching as Jimmy devoured the food with the desperate hunger of someone who had been starving. The sight made Mac's decision easy. "Jimmy, you can't stay out here in this weather. You'll freeze to death before morning. How would you feel about coming home with me? I've got a warm cabin, hot food, and a safe place to sleep." Jimmy looked up at him with surprise and desperate hope. "You'd really take me in, even though you're what?" Mac asked gently. "Indian," Jimmy said quietly, as if it were something to be ashamed of. Mac felt his heart break a little more at the boy's words. "Jimmy, you're a child who needs help. That's all that matters to me." The ride back to Mac's ranch took an hour through the increasing snow, with Jimmy bundled in Mac's own coat and riding in front of him on the horse. The boy was so exhausted that he fell asleep during the journey, his small body finally relaxing. In the safety of someone's care, Mac's ranch was modest but comfortable. A small log cabin with a barn and corral that reflected the hard work of a man who had built everything with his own hands. As they approached, Mac could see warm light glowing from the windows, a welcoming sight in the gathering storm. "Jimmy," Mac said softly as they reached the cabin, "wake up, son. We're home." The boy stirred and looked around with wonder at the cozy homestead. "This is really where you live." "This is where we live now," Mac corrected with a smile. "Come on, let's get you inside where it's warm." The interior of the cabin was everything Jimmy could have dreamed of during his cold nights in the wilderness. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, filling the room with warmth and light. Simple but comfortable furniture spoke of a man who valued practicality and comfort over luxury. "Sit by the fire," Mac instructed, helping Jimmy out of the borrowed coat. "Let me get you some hot soup and we'll get you warmed up properly." As Jimmy sat by the fire, slowly feeling returning to his frozen hands and feet, he watched Mac move around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. This stranger had taken him in without question, shown him kindness when he had expected rejection. Or worse. Double quotes Mr. Donovan. Jimmy said hesitantly, "Why are you helping me? Most white folks don't like Indians." Mac paused in his cooking, considering how to answer honestly without frightening the boy. "Jimmy, I've known good people and bad people of every color. What matters to me isn't where someone comes from, but who they choose to be. And you're a brave little boy who's been through something terrible. Anyone with a heart would want to help you. But what if people find out you're hiding an Indian boy? Won't you get in trouble?" Mac brought over a bowl of hot beef stew and sat down across from Jimmy. "Son, this is my land, my home. I decide who's welcome here, and you're welcome for as long as you want to stay." Jimmy ate the stew slowly, savoring both the warmth of the food and the warmth of kindness he hadn't experienced in weeks. "Mr. Donovan, I don't have any money to pay you back. I don't have anything at all. Jimmy, you don't owe me anything, but if you want to help around the ranch when you're feeling better, I'd appreciate the company. Gets lonely out here sometimes. I can work hard," Jimmy said eagerly. "My father taught me to care for horses and cattle before everything happened." "I'm sure you can," Mac replied with a smile. "But first, you need to get healthy and strong again. That's your only job right now." That night, as Jimmy slept peacefully in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Mac sat by the fire thinking about what he had gotten himself into. Taking in a Native American child in the current political climate was risky, potentially dangerous. But looking at the boy's innocent face, Mac knew he had made the right choice. What Mac didn't know was that Jimmy Crowfeather was no ordinary orphan child. His father had been a respected leader among the Crow Nation, and his disappearance had not gone unnoticed by his people. Even now, searchers were combing the territory, following rumors and tracking signs, desperately hoping to find the missing boy alive. That the next morning dawned clear and cold. The storm having passed during the night, Mac was making breakfast when he heard the sound that would change everything, the thunder of many horses approaching at speed. Through his window, he could see them coming across the snow-covered plains, dozens of riders moving with purpose and determination toward his remote ranch. Some wore the blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers, others the traditional dress of Native American warriors, and still others appeared to be civilian officials. "Jimmy," Mac called quietly, "come here, son. I think we're about to have visitors." Jimmy appeared at his side, looking out the window with growing amazement and fear. "Mr. Donovan, those are Crow warriors and soldiers," and he paused, his young face showing confusion and hope. "I think I see Uncle Robert." Mac felt his stomach drop as he realized the full implications of what was happening. Somehow, the small boy he had rescued from the snow was important enough to bring together an army of searchers, including what appeared to be both military and tribal representatives. "Jimmy," Mac said carefully, "is there something you haven't told me about who you are?" Before the boy could answer, the sound of approaching horses filled the air, and Mac knew that his quiet life as a simple rancher was about to become very complicated indeed. Subscribe to our channel to see what happens next. Who is Jimmy Crowfeather really, and why are so many people looking for him? What will happen when the army of riders reaches Mac's ranch? Don't miss the explosive next chapter where secrets are revealed and alliances are tested. The army of riders that approached Mac Donovan's ranch was unlike anything the isolated cowboy had ever seen. Leading the group was a tall man in a blue cavalry uniform, whose bearing suggested high rank and authority. Beside him rode a Crow warrior whose elaborate dress and proud posture marked him as a chief or leader among his people. Behind them came a mixture that defied easy categorization: more cavalry soldiers, additional Native American warriors, men in civilian clothes who carried themselves like government officials, and even what appeared to be newspaper reporters with their notebooks and cameras. "Jimmy," Mac said quietly as they watched the approaching group, "I need you to tell me the truth now. Who exactly are you?" Jimmy's young face showed a mixture of relief and apprehension. "My father was Chief Joseph Crowfeather. He was trying to make peace between our people and the government when he was killed." Mac felt his blood run cold. Even he, isolated as he was, had heard of Chief Joseph Crowfeather. The man had been one of the most respected leaders among the Crow Nation, known for his efforts to negotiate fair treaties and prevent the kind of bloodshed that had plagued other regions. "And a man you think you recognized?" Mac asked. "Uncle Robert. He's not really my uncle, but he was my father's closest friend. Robert Walking Bear, the new chief of our band." Mac realized he was holding his breath as the riders drew closer. This wasn't just about returning a lost child to his family. This was about the son of a murdered peace chief, a boy whose survival or death could affect relations between the Crow Nation and the United States government. "Mr. Donovan," Jimmy said, his voice small and frightened. "What if they think you kidnapped me? What if the soldiers arrest you?" Mac put a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "Jimmy, we'll tell them the truth. How I found you, how you've been treated. The truth has a way of sorting things out." The riders reached the ranch and formed a semicircle in the yard, their horses' breath visible in the cold air. The cavalry officer dismounted first, his movements crisp and military, followed by the Crow chief, whose eyes immediately found Jimmy through the window. Mac opened his door and stepped onto his porch, Jimmy close behind him. The sight of the boy alive and well sent a visible wave of relief through both the Native American and military contingents. "Mr. Donovan," the cavalry officer called out, "I'm Colonel Anderson, and this is Chief Robert Walking Bear. We're here about the boy." "I figured as much," Mac replied calmly. "Jimmy told me you might be looking for him." Chief Walking Bear approached the porch, his eyes never leaving Jimmy's face. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. "Little Crow, we have searched for you across 3 territories. Your people feared you were dead." Jimmy stepped forward, no longer the frightened child Mac had found in the snow. "Uncle Robert, Mr. Donovan saved my life. He found me freezing in the storm and brought me to his home. He has been kind to me." Colonel Anderson studied Mac with the calculating gaze of a professional soldier. "Mr. Donovan, there are some serious questions about how this boy came to be in your custody. The circumstances of his father's death are still under investigation." "Colonel," Mac said evenly, "I found Jimmy 3 days ago, half frozen and starving near Willow Creek. I brought him home, fed him, and kept him safe. That's the extent of my involvement in this situation." One of the civilian officials, a thin man with the bearing of a bureaucrat, stepped forward. "Mr. Donovan, I'm Agent Morrison from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This child is a ward of the federal government and should have been turned over to proper authorities immediately." Mac felt his temper begin to rise. "Agent Morrison, this child was dying when I found him. My first priority was saving his life, not worrying about paperwork." Chief Walking Bear raised his hand, silencing the brewing argument. "The white cowboy speaks truth. Little Crow lives because of his kindness. This is what matters." "Nevertheless," Colonel Anderson said, "there are protocols that must be followed. The boy will need to be taken into protective custody while we sort out the proper arrangements." "No," Jimmy said firmly, surprising everyone with the strength in his young voice. "Uncle Robert, I wish to stay with Mr. Donovan. He has shown me more kindness than I have known since Father died." A murmur went through the assembled group. The request was unprecedented and politically complicated. "Son," Colonel Anderson said gently, "you don't understand the complexities involved here. Your safety requires official protection." "My safety," Jimmy replied with wisdom beyond his years, "has been protected by Mr. Donovan when no one else even knew I was alive." Chief Walking Bear studied Mac with the intense scrutiny of a man who had learned to read character through years of dealing with both friends and enemies. "Cowboy, why do you help the son of Joseph Crowfeather?" Mac met the chief's gaze steadily. "Because he's a child who needed help. I don't care about politics or treaties or tribal relations. I care about what's right." "And what do you think is right?" "I think Jimmy should have a say in his own future. He's been through enough tragedy without having decisions made for him by people who don't know him." One of the reporters, a young man with an eager expression, stepped forward. "Mr. Donovan, are you aware that your actions have potentially prevented a war?" Mac looked confused. "What do you mean?" Colonel Anderson sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Mr. Donovan, when Jimmy disappeared after his father's death, Many among the Crow believed he had been taken by hostile forces. There was talk of retaliation, of breaking the peace treaty. Chief Walking Bear nodded gravely. My warriors were ready to ride against those who had stolen our chief's son. Your kindness may have prevented much bloodshed. The implications of this revelation hit Mac like a physical blow. His simple act of rescuing a freezing child had unknowingly prevented what could have been a devastating conflict. Furthermore, Agent Morrison added reluctantly, the boy's testimony about the circumstances of his father's death could be crucial to our investigation. There are suggestions that Chief Joseph's killing was not a random act of violence. Jimmy looked up at Mac with eyes that held newfound understanding of his own importance. Mr. Donovan, I know who killed my father. I saw it happen. A stunned silence fell over the group. This orphan child wasn't just a symbol of peace between two peoples. He was a witness to what might have been murder. Jimmy, Colonel Anderson, said carefully, you'll need to tell us what you saw. But such testimony is dangerous. There are people who wouldn't want your story to be heard. Mac felt his protective instincts flare. Colonel, are you saying this boy's life is in danger? I'm saying, Anderson replied grimly, that the stakes involved here are higher than any of us initially realized. Chief Walking Bear stepped closer to Mac, his weathered face showing respect and gratitude. Cowboy, you have done more than save one child's life. You have given my people hope that justice is possible. But you have also, Agent Morrison added ominously, made yourself a target for those who profit from conflict between our peoples. Mac looked down at Jimmy, seeing not just a child he had rescued, but a boy whose survival had apparently prevented a war and whose testimony might expose corruption and murder. The simple act of kindness that had seemed so natural 3 days ago had thrust him into the center of territorial politics. Jimmy, Mac said gently, the choice is yours. You can go with your people or with the government officials, or, he paused, hardly believing he was about to make such an offer. You can stay here with me, and we'll face whatever comes together. Jimmy's face lit up with relief and determination. I want to stay with you, Mr. Donovan, but I also want to tell the truth about what happened to my father. Colonel Anderson and Chief Walking Bear exchanged glances, both recognizing the unprecedented nature of the situation they were facing. Very well, Anderson said finally, but if Jimmy is going to stay here and provide testimony, this ranch will need protection. There are forces that won't hesitate to silence a witness. Chief Walking Bear nodded in agreement. My warriors will help guard the boy and the cowboy who saved him. As the various officials began making arrangements for Jimmy's protection and testimony, Mac realized that his quiet life as a simple rancher was over forever. But looking at the boy who had brought together soldiers and warriors, government, agents and tribal chiefs, all united in their desire to protect one brave child, Mac knew he wouldn't change a thing. Subscribe to our channel to see the powerful conclusion. How will Mac and Jimmy's alliance change the course of frontier justice? What secrets will Jimmy's testimony reveal about his father's murder? Don't miss the final chapter where courage and truth triumph over corruption and violence. 2 weeks had passed since the dramatic gathering at Mac Donovan's ranch, and the small homestead had been transformed into something resembling a military outpost. Crow warriors maintained a perimeter around the property while cavalry soldiers provided additional security. At the center of it all, 8-year-old Jimmy Crow Feather prepared to give testimony that would expose a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of territorial government. Jimmy, Mac said gently as they sat by the fireplace on the morning of the hearing, are you sure you're ready for this? Once you tell your story, there's no going back. Jimmy looked up at the man who had become like a father to him, his young face showing determination that belied his age. Mr. Donovan, my father died trying to make peace. If I don't tell the truth about what really happened, his death will be for nothing. The territorial hearing was being held in the largest building available, the church in nearby Silver Creek, with officials, reporters, and observers coming from as far away as Washington, D.C. The case had attracted national attention as a test of whether justice could prevail over the political and economic interests that often drove frontier conflicts. Mac and Jimmy rode into town accompanied by an escort that included both Colonel Anderson's soldiers and Chief Walking Bear's warriors, a sight that drew amazed stares from every person they passed. Never before had anyone seen such cooperation between military and tribal forces. Inside the church, Judge Harrison from the territorial court had set up a formal hearing, with rows of benches filled with every important figure in the region. Mac recognized newspaper reporters, government officials, military officers, tribal leaders, and local citizens, all waiting to hear what Jimmy had to say. "Jimmy," Judge Harrison said kindly as the boy took his place at the witness table, "I want you to know that you're safe here. Just tell us what you saw, in your own words." Jimmy took a deep breath and began his story. "My father, Chief Joseph Crowfeather, had a meeting with Agent Williams about our people moving to the new reservation. But Agent Williams wasn't alone. When he came to our village, who was with him?" the judge asked. "Mr. Cornelius Blake from the railroad company and Colonel Morrison from the territorial militia. They said they had a new treaty for my father to sign." Mac watched as several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably at the mention of these names. Blake was one of the most powerful businessmen in the territory, and Morrison had a reputation for harsh treatment of Native Americans. "What happened during this meeting?" Judge Harrison continued. Jimmy's voice grew steadier as he continued. "They showed my father papers that said our people would get good land and fair payment for moving. But my father could read English better than they knew. He saw that the papers were different from what they were saying." "Different how?" "The treaty gave the railroad company rights to all the mineral deposits on our new land, and it said we could be moved again any time the government wanted. My father said it was a lie meant to cheat our people." A murmur went through the courtroom. If Jimmy's testimony was accurate, it suggested a conspiracy to defraud the Crow Nation of valuable mining rights. "What happened when your father refused to sign?" Jimmy's composure wavered slightly as he approached the most difficult part of his testimony. "Agent Williams said my father was being unreasonable. Colonel Morrison said that if the Crow wouldn't cooperate, they would be forced to cooperate. And then my father stood up to leave, and Colonel Morrison shot him. Agent Williams said they would report that my father attacked them and had to be killed in self-defense." The courtroom erupted. In shocked voices and angry murmurs, Judge Harrison called for order. But the revelation had sent shockwaves through everyone present. "Jimmy," the judge said when order was restored, "this is a very serious accusation. Are you certain of what you saw?" "Yes, sir. I was hiding behind our lodge, watching the meeting like my father taught me to do. He always said I should observe how white officials acted when they thought no one was watching." Colonel Anderson stood up from the audience. "Your Honor, if this testimony is accurate, it means that Chief Joseph's death was not the result of tribal hostility, but a planned assassination to force through a fraudulent treaty." Agent Morrison himself was present in the courtroom, and Mac could see the man's face growing pale as the implications of Jimmy's testimony became clear. Furthermore, Jimmy continued, his young voice carrying clearly through the silent church, "After they killed my father, I heard them planning what to do next. Mr. Blake said they needed to make sure no one could challenge the treaty later. What did they plan to do? They were going to report that our whole village had been hostile, that soldiers needed to attack it for safety. But some of our warriors came back early from hunting, and there was fighting. That's when I ran and hid." Chief Walking Bear stood up, his weathered face showing both grief and vindication. "This boy speaks truth. We found evidence of the planned attack, but until now, we could not prove the soldiers struck first." Judge Harrison studied the documents that had been presented as evidence, comparing them with Jimmy's testimony. "Mr. Blake, you are present in this courtroom. Do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Cornelius Blake, a well-dressed man who had been growing increasingly agitated throughout Jimmy's testimony, stood up with obvious reluctance. "Your Honor, this is the word of a child against respected officials. Surely you cannot seriously consider." "I'm considering," Judge Harrison interrupted, "the testimony of an eyewitness to what appears to be murder and conspiracy to commit fraud." "Mr. Blake, are you denying that you were present at the meeting described by this witness?" Blake's silence was more damning than any words could have. Agent Williams, who had been sitting quietly throughout the hearing, suddenly stood up. "Your Honor, I have something to say." The courtroom fell silent as Williams approached the witness table, his face showing the strain of carrying a terrible secret for weeks. "Everything the boy said is true," Williams said quietly. "Colonel Morrison did kill Chief Joseph in cold blood when he refused to sign the fraudulent treaty. Mr. Blake threatened to have me killed if I didn't support their story about Indian hostility." The confession sent another wave of shock through the courtroom. Mac watched as federal marshals moved to arrest both Blake and Morrison, who had been trying to slip out during the commotion. Furthermore, Williams continued, the railroad company was planning to use this incident to justify seizing not just Crow lands, but territory belonging to several other tribes. "The mineral rights involved are worth millions of dollars." Judge Harrison called for a recess as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. Mac found himself surrounded by reporters, wanting to know about his role in protecting Jimmy and enabling this testimony. "Mr. Donovan," one reporter asked, "did you have any idea when you rescued this boy that you were preventing a war and exposing such massive corruption?" Mac looked over at Jimmy, who was being embraced by Chief Walking Bear and other tribal leaders who had come to hear his testimony. "I just saw a child who needed help. Sometimes doing the right thing leads to bigger things than you ever imagined." "And what happens now?" another reporter asked. "Now," Mac replied, "Jimmy gets to grow up knowing that his father's death meant something, that justice is possible even when powerful people try to prevent it." 6 months later, the territorial legislature passed the most comprehensive Native American rights legislation in the West, largely as a result of the public outrage generated by Jimmy's testimony. Cornelius Blake and Colonel Morrison were convicted of murder and conspiracy, serving lengthy prison sentences. Agent Williams, in exchange for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence and was reassigned to a desk job far from any tribal territories. Jimmy Crow Feather remained at Mac Donovan's ranch, legally adopted and attending school while maintaining strong connections with his tribal heritage. Under Chief Walking Bear's guidance, the boy who had been found freezing in a snowstorm had become a symbol of hope for peaceful coexistence between cultures. Most importantly, the ranch that had attracted dozens of riders on that dramatic day became a gathering place where Native American and white leaders could meet on neutral ground to discuss issues affecting both communities. "Mac," Jimmy said, one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that night?" Mac thought about the war that had been prevented, the corruption that had been exposed, and the lives that had been changed by one simple act of kindness. "I think, son, that sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences. You taught me that helping one person can change the world. And you taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you when things get difficult." Years later, Jimmy Crow Feather would become a lawyer, an advocate for Native American rights, using his education and unique position to bridge the gap between cultures. Mac Donovan would be remembered not just as the cowboy who found a freezing child, but as the man whose simple humanity helped prevent a war and expose a conspiracy that could have devastated multiple tribal communities. The boy who brought an army to a lonely ranch had proven that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is the truth spoken by someone brave enough to tell it. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories from the American frontier. This incredible tale of Jimmy and Mac proves that one act of kindness can have consequences far beyond what we imagine, and that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it's the bravery to help a stranger, and sometimes it's the courage to speak truth to power. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to join us for more emotional journeys that show how individual choices can change the course of history. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that doing the right thing always matters, even when we can't see how much it matters.